thriving in the new world of frontline leadership development. For this session, I'd like to call on stage Bruce Watt, Vice President DDI.
About a month ago, I was sitting in Paris with the Chief of HR and Chief of their Data and Analytics, discussing a program that we'd been working on for the last 3 years, very much pitched at the Vice President level. This is a global technology consulting organisation, 200,000 people, and actually, by virtue of an acquisition, half of them are based in India. And we were looking at this reasonably impressive data about the development of vice presidents, and the CHRO looked at me and said, "Bruce, what problem are we trying to solve here?" And of course, as a consultant, I said, "Well, we're developing leadership capability so that it's aligned with your digital transformation." And he said, "No, we're not." He said, "That's a lead indicator. Every one of our competitors, every organisation that I know is headed in that direction. The problem that we're trying to solve is how to make this move faster, the issue of acceleration." And he said, one of the things that is really frustrating here is that we're still in this arbitrage of a performance paradigm and a transformation paradigm. And too much of our leadership development is being held back by what we do to hold leaders hostage in the past paradigm. And he asked me, "So you've done about 1,000 assessments here, and what's the one thing that you've reflected on after those debriefs?" And I could have said, "Well, I think there's been some fantastic development in terms of the ability of these people to hyper-collaborate, to think in ways that infuse their leadership with a digital context, to mobilise people through visionary behaviours and create an environment of innovation." But I said one thing, and it actually is the thing that I'm thinking more when I sit with senior leaders. I wish they'd started earlier, because so many of the things that leaders need to do to mobilise people in this digital age, you can't just pick up late in your career. So the question becomes, what are we doing now to develop frontline leaders so in 2-3 years, which is sort of the time frame, they're ready to do things like mobilise people in a digital age, mobilise an organisation that can hyper-collaborate across silos and leverage technology. And these are things that you just can't turn up and do. And by the way, these are things that every single senior VP gets intellectually. But this isn't an intellectual thing, it's a behavioural thing. So what I want to talk to you today is a little bit about frontline leadership. Not in the context of what should go into it, but more in the context of some of the changes, some of the metamorphosis that's happened in our world and what it means for frontline leadership. The reason that I said we should have started earlier is because when I work with senior leaders, and this has always been the case, it's just accentuated now, the thing that we're working on are how they manage themselves. How under moments of pressure they're able to keep open and listen, how they're able to actually manage those characteristics that are pretty deep within them. That's why you can't start late. If you had a look at a lot of frontline programs historically, including our work in this field, very rarely did we include that stuff. We taught people to delegate, we taught people to sort of, manage the pragmatics of an organisation. So my hypothesis to you is that there's a real disconnect here. Now, this is our time in history, because with technology, with the ability to actually fuse diagnosis and development, we can actually bring what was once the preserve of senior leadership development into the realm of the front line. Frontline leaders bring themselves, senior leaders bring themselves. If you interrogated your frontline programs, is there enough that actually tells you about how they're going to learn that self-insight to become the leaders they need to be, not just at the front line, but all the way up? What we know about leadership transitions is that it's incredibly stressful. This comes from a few years ago now, but it's some global research that DDI did on transitions and the stress associated with a range of life domain transitions. And leadership role transitions are right up there at the top, which is a little bit ironic when you start to consider the importance of the economics of leadership development. We know that starting early makes a quantifiable difference. After the War for Talent was released in 1998, I remember that was a seminal sort of revelation to myself and a lot of colleagues, and we plunged enthusiastically into the world of developing leadership pipelines. We stayed at the top of the apex though. I think a lot of that was probably economics, that's where we had the greatest need. If you start thinking about the way the world is changing, the importance of frontline leadership in terms of the scale of it, how much of the workforce in a flattened world is being managed by the frontline, how we're helping frontline. Every organisation talks about we need this world of to monetise curiosity, to monetise client needs, to monetise technology. We need people working out of silos. And that doesn't happen through the senior leaders sitting in their ivory towers looking at spreadsheets. It happens through frontline leaders being with customers, actually building a network. And I promise you, having spent 30 years in this space, very few human beings bring that characteristic and skill with them into an organisation. Intellectually they get it, but if you want to collaborate, if you want to innovate across the organisation, it's actually a skill and it's a habit and it's purposeful. You don't just turn up and do it. You don't just turn up and have a conversation with people who are craving impact and do it well. You practice that. Every one of us in this room knows that the vast majority of people who are eligible for that first line promotion position come with the track record of superb performance and technical skills, and those things are virtually redundant in leadership, of course. Their people are going to expect them, independent of whether they've got a natural disposition to empathy, to be able to show empathy, to be able to show compassion, to be able to use metaphors and paint a future, to be able to energise. Now, it is true you can select people with those dispositions, and that's important, but we've got to do more to develop those people. At the moment, we've generally done it at the top. I keep coming back to this promise to you that actually now, with all this amazing technology, the miracle of what we can do is bring it down to the front line. One of the things that's happened in the world over the last 40 years is a metamorphosis. But there hasn't been a metamorphosis in leadership development. As a leader, you're asked to do two things. You're asked to protect, one, but ideally grow the asset with which you have custody. Now that asset, when I started my work, was very much bricks and mortar. And I'm Australian by origin, so you can sort of imagine actually we did manufacturing then in Australia, and we had a lot of mining and heavy industry. So you were very much managing a tangible asset, and people were sort of incidental, although we never actually said that. The metamorphosis now is that 80% of the organisational value and asset that we manage is people. Yet, if you actually did your due diligence on frontline leadership development particularly, I challenge you, you would probably see that most of it is focused on those fundamental skills still that enable people to manage the tangible and not the intangible asset. So, if our companies are made up of intangible assets and frontline leaders are that critical role that actually have the most impact on protecting and increasing the value of that asset, why are they the least prepared? And this is from a montage of different research. It's not anecdotal. We know that 2/3 of frontline leaders feel unprepared for the role, and we've known this for some time. Through survey research, we know that 60% of frontline leaders say they've never received any training for the role. And we know that 87% of first-time leaders feel frustrated, anxious, uncertain about their new role. In India, less than 1 in 2 rate the quality of frontline leadership as adequate or high. So there is a disparity. And let me be absolutely candid with you, I think a lot of it has been to do with just the pragmatics of economics and how much we've had to invest in frontline leaders. But we're a little bit slow to respond to the possibilities that lie before us at the moment. So what about preparing frontline leaders in a way that's more aligned with the business, economic, social realities that confront us? There's a lot of talk about different generations, and as a psychologist and not a sociologist, I sometimes have a bit of a different interpretation of generations. That being that my parents, I'm pretty sure, thought the same about me as I think about my millennial children. That being said, every generation is shaped by its environment, no doubt. If you start looking at what the Gen X and millennials particularly are looking for from a preparation to meet challenges, it's pretty similar. Yet a lot of our learning and development is obsessed by this bifurcation of what millennials needs and what Gen X needs. So part of our challenge is to think, what are we doing at the front line that actually prepares those leaders by the time they get to more senior levels are actually going to be able to thrive leading a digital organisation? And I know we're talking about organisations becoming flatter. Let me assure you, that does not diminish the importance of leadership. It absolutely deconstructs the hierarchy, but leadership has never been more important. Let me move on a couple of slides here. What we're talking about at the front line are multiplier skills, and let me explain what I mean here. Multiplier skills are things which, if you don't have early, it's very difficult to develop them late. Term that comes from economics. If you talk to any senior leader about what they need their people to do, it's about how leaders are going to actually help people obviously stay engaged, but in a very purposeful way. Help people innovate, but also once innovation becomes industrialised, stay energised. I think it was the gentleman earlier today who said the three, the triad of people wanting development, the triad of people wanting a good relationship with their manager and wanting meaningful work hold true. When we want organisations to actually be really, really close to their customers, that happens through people very much at the front line and leaders actually working very closely with their people to be able to coach and develop and actually make sure that that happens through interactions. If there are 480 minutes in an 8-hour day and we don't manage people through spreadsheets, every interaction, every conversation is a consequence. If a conversation goes well, there's economic benefit in that. If a conversation goes badly, I don't think it's a linear thing. There's a theory called catastrophes effect. And if you did an analysis of organisations and the conversations that go badly, you see a much more sort of hyperbolic drop-off in productivity. Judgment's critical. I believe a lot of the quality of senior problems that have happened in leadership are not through people that are badly intentioned, and a lot of my time is spent in Europe. They're reasonably well intentioned and they're impeccably educated. They have blue chip multinational career experiences, and they get to senior level and make, think of organisations like Volkswagen, curiously dangerous and catastrophic decisions. The issue of judgment, the issue about how somebody knows themselves, how somebody's able to work within whatever ethical framework, and understand how they navigate through complexity and keep their true north, is not something you read a book about late. If you haven't started that early, good luck. And in a very transparent world, that needs to be prepared. The last one about personal mastery. One of the things that you will find if you work a lot with senior leaders is when they hop on I don't think you do it in India, but if you were flying from Australia, for instance, you put your profession, maybe you do, on a departure card. And many years ago, I was flying to India, and I was sitting on a plane with a fellow from an investment bank, actually, and we were talking about what each other did. And he said, what did you put on your departure card? I said, I put that I'm a psychologist. And he said, we've been talking for 2.5 hours. Is that what you do? I said, no, I sort of manage an organisation. He said, well, why didn't you put leader or manager? That was one of those moments in my life that changed, for me, what I think about. What do I practice every day? Do I practice being a psychologist? Or do I practice being a leader? Do I practice those key conversations? Do I practice the type of things that are going to inspire people? Do I look at the complexities of how an organisation is working and how I'm going to influence? Or do I just turn up and do those things and hope they go well, but identify with being a psychologist or an engineer or a technologist? Ultimately, it's people that are going to have to be mobilised to get things done. So these are the 3 things that we wanted to develop early. And if you look at all the research about what it is that really drives effective leadership, ultimately it's our ability to drive strong interactions. It's our ability to actually execute consistently good judgment. That's what you get paid for. And none of that stuff is intellectual only. It requires practice and mastery to be able to do. So all these are things which should be built into frontline programs. When we look at what leaders are looking for, or learners at the frontline, we live in a very data literate world, so it's highly unlikely now if you're just putting leaders in sort of generic, putting frontline leaders in terms of generic programs, that they're going to be convinced. They're looking for scientific evidence, they're looking for a strong, compelling database to make sure that you've got some proof. They're asking for that aha moment much earlier. They're wanting to have those discussions that help them understand themselves. I've had lots of frontline leaders say things to me like, it's about the burden of leadership and about the thing of your leadership brand. And the fact that, in leadership it's what you do under stress that matters, not what you do in a sort of a generic sense. As I think about it, those things used to happen more at the higher levels of leadership, and they're happening more at the front line. So self-awareness is critical. They want to work with things that have been strongly developed, and they want to have choice. The idea of personalisation now, I think, is driven. We always knew, in the 1960s we knew it was going to be important, but there used to be like assessment people and development people. with technology now, you can have both together. What that means is you can personalise things. No one wants to sit there for hours in front of a facilitator in a classroom. You know, when I walk into many organisations now, if I went back, so I go back 50 years and I go into that organisation now, I wouldn't recognise many parts of it, but what makes me sad is if I walk into the learning and development part, I still know it's a training room. It's sad, huh? We've always talked about linking development to on the job. Now, I'm going to show you a video in a minute that sort of gives a bit of a montage of this. What I say to everyone in this field now, and I just in the few hours I've been here this morning, I've been inspired and equally bewildered by the deluge of technology and it talks about the total transformation in work from full-time to contract to all the stuff that is very, very true in a social matrix point of view. At the end of the day, when you're working in a company and you're paid to actually develop leaders who are going to maintain and grow the asset, the purpose of developing those people is they link it back on the job. And all that technology, all that data, all that analytics, this digital age that we live in, the one thing it tells me is we can finally take development out of the classroom, not totally, but out of the classroom and into the everyday practice of what we do. We've never had this opportunity before. So this is our time in history to develop the best leaders that will change the world. So we talk about three things. We talk about content, we talk about access, and we talk about technology. I mentioned before the link between, I'll start on the right-hand side, personalisation. Learning isn't just about skills as a leader. You can only really leverage four things: who you are as a person, your personality, motivation, knowledge, and skills. That's got to be brought into the real world and out of the classroom, into the real world of practice, and it has to be linked to the business. And now that we know enough in our field to know if we want to produce a particular person who can do something in an organisation, we know exactly what that person should look like and how to develop them. We really do. The question is how we start to assemble things to get that right. So, away from the classroom, much more into this learner-centric, personalised world. And let me show you a quick video to demonstrate what that looks like.
Every workday, leaders have 8 hours. That's 480 minutes to make a difference. 480 minutes to coach, to make tough decisions, to welcome, to fail, to show courage, to lead. But we know that leadership doesn't stop at the end of the workday. Leadership happens in the problems we solve while making dinner, in the conversations we replay in our heads as we fall asleep, in the revelations that come to us in the shower. Leadership is a personal commitment to making an impact, and it changes the arc of our lives, inside and outside of work, day after day, week after week, year after year. For the millions of moments that define the life of a leader, DDI's commitment is to be by the leader's side for every one of them. We're here for the big moments of transformation, helping them start off on the right foot in their first manager role, showing them the ropes of hiring the right people for their team, building their strengths to take on higher level challenges, and even guiding them into the C-suite. And in between these milestones, we are making it our mission to be there for the small moments that make everything else happen. With the help of technology, we can support leaders through every one of those 6 million leadership moments. Imagine enabling leaders to get coaching on demand anytime, anywhere. Think about how wearable technology could sense when leaders might be feeling anxious before a meeting and provide support. Envision using virtual reality to practice a tough conversation before the real one. Our future is in supporting the leader as a whole person, head and heart, in every critical moment of leadership. Because we know it's a tough job. Leadership is a human endeavor, inevitably riddled with mistakes and triumphs. And our work isn't just about providing development or assessments or strategy. It's about helping leaders find more moments of impact and satisfaction at work, and weather the tough days with courage, so that when they come home at night, they know that they've used their 480 minutes to make a real difference in the lives of their teams. And as a result, each of their 480 minutes made their organizations hum. Enabling great companies to do great things. When DDI is by leaders' sides, we can change the world. And that's why, in our 480 minutes each day, we do what we do. We create better leaders for a better future.
It's, for all our 50 years of research and science, ultimately it's a passion for doing that. One of the things in India that you will know DDI from sometimes is more than that executive space. And the reason that we've actually put these three rows and started to look at the fusion of diagnostics and development is that's where all our work has gone. So I've only got 1 minute 30 left according to this somewhat distracting stopwatch in front of me. What questions might you have?
I have a contrarian view to something I've been seeing on various L&D slides out here and a lot of these things, and I'd like to kind of challenge the notion a little
Sure.
bit. And that's the notion of this, I just saw a slide, 15% of people pick up any skills from the classroom which they can invest to improve performance. Now, somehow my personal experience has been very different than this otherwise popularized notion of this one. Primarily because I belong to an insurance organization where the only difference between that company and the rest was that it invested extremely heavily in just this classroom training bit. And 20 years later, when the industry still wants its best people, where do they go back to? To that same company. Now why? That's question one.
Yep.
Second is, while you're learning on the field, you have no control over who's learning, what kind of practices work. And most of our people end up learning the wrong things in terms of something that might get them short-term business, but is essentially a very wrong thing to do for the overall industry and for their own careers.
Yeah.
And you've got absolutely zero control over that. And three, just look at us. We are in this room. Why didn't this conference happen in a completely digital format? Why is there the human need still to come together, still to learn from each other in an interactive, physically human space rather than a 100% virtual space? Why can't this conference be 100% virtual?
They're actually not contrarian views. Not once did I say that the importance of the classroom, the quality of that experience, it's necessary but insufficient. That's where DDI's heritage is. But it can't stop there. I bet you, would bet everything I have, that that foundation, that launch pad in that stupendously successful insurance company was launched in the classroom, but there were a whole other lot of factors that made those leaders grow. Right? Now that is important. The other thing, we're here today because it is, never once did I say that the need for human action, orientation, not to be physical and come together. But that could happen in an action learning group. That could happen, I see teams working more now across organisations. Let's be really, conferences like this are important for networking, collegial collaboration. Could we do it virtually? Maybe not as successfully, but this is necessary but insufficient. So it's not contrarian. What I'm actually advocating is that we stop sort of protecting the past and saying that's the way it is. Let's embrace the technology that we have to build on this wonderful opportunity. Otherwise, we'll never get anywhere, because all the research in the world indicates, and I'm sorry, I'll be contrarian about one thing, there are very few organisations that are satisfied with the leaders they have anywhere in the world. So if you've worked in that space as I have, we've failed. We have to be better and stop protecting the past. Don't venerate it. Be better, have a vision. Don't worry, you can be a contrarian. Okay, I think I've used up the time.
Hi, my name is Karthik Swaminathan. I have a company called Zoom Learn. I sort of partly agree with what he said. I think you're searching for me? Yeah. There is this concept called digital immigrants and digital natives, right? We are people who are like 40 plus are digital immigrants. We came into this environment. And the new guys are the digital natives who are born into it. Though we train people, we have no control over how they learn. That is a trait that they pick up as they grow up. So over a period of time, I think classroom would be slowly phased out, not because classroom is ineffective. It is because the way the people learn has changed. This would also include interpersonal skills. I think in future we will have to redefine interpersonal skills as an ability of a person to interact in WhatsApp and Twitter, rather than a face-to-face meeting. So I think that change is happening, and the technology that is coming into training is a result of that. And it's not the other way around, that the classroom doesn't work.
So I just need to clarify the question, I'm sorry. Are you saying that the classroom can be enhanced?
I'm just saying classroom is like one of those huge cars that American produced 60 years ago,
okay.
Right? It needs that sort of a roads and that sort of fuel economy.
Yeah. I think I'm a little bit nervous about, as a person who has been part of the classroom for all my career, I don't want to sort of desecrate the importance of the classroom. What we need to do is find ways to make it, so for instance, why do we still put people in a classroom where everyone learns the same thing, when if we use diagnostics before, you can use electives so you can start to actually integrate things? Why do we not connect sort of action learning in the classroom? It's not mutually exclusive. I'm talking about an evolution of the classroom. And I'm being summoned off the stage. Thank you.